What's up, gamers? Welcome to the video. My name is Koobs, and today I would like to share with you my beginner's guide to learning the Riot Shield in the finals. Now, the Riot Shield is probably my favorite weapon in the game. I think that it's so much fun to use, but it's one of those weapons that takes a little bit of time to get used to. It's not as easy to just pick up and use as, say, an AK or a P90 is. There's a little bit of intricacy to the way that the weapon works, and there's a little bit of, trial and error that goes into getting good with a weapon like the Riot Shield. But overall, I find it very rewarding once you do start to figure out how to use this weapon to its fullest potential and really get the most out of it. So today what I want to do is share some of my knowledge and experience, provide some tips for using the Riot Shield, talk about some of the gadgets and specializations that pair really well with this weapon, talk about some of the things that easily counter the Riot Shield, and hopefully help you become better and more confident when using this awesome weapon in the finals. So thanks so much for being here. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, I do think that it's important for me to share this clip with you, because this is me, and embarrassingly, I think many of us have been here before. I almost want to call this the chicken wing dance, because we're just running around a room trying to hit each other with elbows. If you notice, my gun's reloaded. I could have just shot that guy. So, I'm not a pro. I'm not some amazing high skill player. I play a lot of quick cash. And I think that for me, one of the things that I love about the finals is it's fast paced and it's fun. It's always fun to play the finals for me. And the Riot Shield leans into that fast paced and fun play style. And that's one of the things that I really like about it. But I do also acknowledge the fact that when you're starting out with a weapon like this, it could be really easy to get a little bit frustrated maybe, or recognize that you're not doing very well with the weapon early on, and so you may switch off of it. And so hopefully today, with some of the things that I'm going to share with you, you'll be able to have a little bit more patience with yourself and patience with this weapon as you are learning all of its strengths and its weaknesses, learning when to attack, when to fall back, when to take advantage of different opportunities and apply pressure to the enemy teams, and various things like that. Before I get too ahead of myself, I did want to start with a quick tip for everyone, and that is when it comes to marking enemies or trying to signal to your team where to attack. When you press the ping button, you're typically going to put the shield down and use your hand to signal where you're headed. But as you'll notice here, if you put the shield up and then do your ping or do your mark, you can actually do so from a safe position, and I think that that's very helpful. But one of the first things that I want to talk about, it has been my transition personally into becoming a bumper jumper. Now, if you're not familiar with what a bumper jumper is, it's when you change the controls so that they better suit your ability to jump and stay in motion while playing on a controller. So I have got my controls set up so that L1 is now my jump button. And what that allows me to do is it means that I never have to take my thumb off of the right analog stick. This allows me to make different moves in the air that otherwise would be a little bit more challenging if you were using the X button or the A button as your jump button, which is typically the default setting for a controller. This allows me to stay fluid and in motion, which is incredibly important with a weapon like the Riot Shield, because you want to take advantage of the momentum that you have and be able to cut enemies off when they're fleeing from you. One of the other things that I've done is I've mapped my quick melee attack to R1 on my controller, or the right bumper, if you will. And so this combination of changes that I've made to the controls they better suit and facilitate what I'm trying to do with this weapon so that I can fully take advantage of the speed and of the chaos that comes with using a weapon like the Riot Shield. And we'll talk a little bit about some damage breakpoints in a minute here, but I do think that it's important to know where your quick melee attack is and making it something that's going to be easy to combo with your primary attack. So those are two quick recommendations that I would make for any players who are trying to master melee weapons in this game, is to consider learning how to become a bumper jumper, and then also take a look at where your quick melee attack is mapped to, especially if you're playing on controller. So let's talk about some damage breakpoints. The primary attack of the Riot Shield is going to do 90 damage. And your quick melee, which is throwing an elbow, you can do this with any weapon in the game, that's going to deal 45 damage to the enemies. Now, one important thing to note is that the number of health bars above the enemy is each chunk of health is equal to 25 hit points. So light enemies will have 6 blocks over their head, mediums will have 10, and heavies will have 14. And this is going to be important to know because you want to be aware of how much damage you need to deal to the enemy to finish them off. Now, typically when facing a light, you're going to need 2 primary attacks, which will deal 180 damage. But if you notice that they have one chunk missing, then you can hit them with a primary and follow that up with a quick melee for 135 damage, which will kill them. Mediums, you're typically going to need 3 primary attacks, but you can actually deal the same amount of damage by using 2 primaries followed up by 2 quick melees. And I'll kind of show that here in a second. And then for heavies, we're going to need 4 primary attacks, which also equates to 3 primaries and 2 quick melees. So one of the things that I've learned to do and become comfortable with when using the Riot Shield is learning this combo of doing a primary attack and following it up with a quick melee. This will allow you to deal 135 damage in a quick burst, and it's also going to reduce the overall time to kill, especially when we talk about medium enemies and heavy enemies. Lights doesn't matter as much unless you notice that they've already been weakened. Now, one of the next topics that I wanted to focus on briefly is latency. And this is going to be the difference between what you see on your screen versus what the enemy player is seeing and doing on their screen. You have to acknowledge the fact that there's always going to be a little bit of a discrepancy between the two. See, here on my screen, it looked like he was totally missing my character model, but when I look at the kill cam, I can clearly see that he was hitting me from his perspective. And this also kind of plays into any of those moments where you feel like maybe you had your shield up in front of you and that you should have blocked some of the incoming damage, but you still got hit. This also kind of leans into any of the times where you feel like you have rounded a corner, but you still get tagged by some bullets. That's going to be latency more often than not. It has to do with your connection and their connection to the server. It's not going to be 100% accurate at all times. Sometimes there is a little bit of a discrepancy between the two things that are happening simultaneously. That's important to understand and acknowledge because it can sometimes feel a little bit frustrating playing the Riot Shield because sometimes you may die to things that you don't necessarily fully understand. I'm glad that they've added in the instant replay, the kill camera. I know that some people aren't overly excited about it. Sometimes it's not perfect, and I do think that it's a great option to be able to toggle it on or off. But as a Riot Shield player, it's something that I find is more beneficial to have on because it allows me to not only learn from my mistakes, but it also gives me the opportunity to learn a little bit more about what my character model looks like to the enemy players. Because we're playing in first person, and the way that our character moves, the way that our shield is angled, and different things like that are sometimes difficult for us to tell. But when we can use the feedback from the instant replay kill camera, it gives us a little bit more of an understanding of some of the ways that our opponents see us, and some of the maybe mistakes that we are making that we can kind of polish up when playing Riot Shield. Sometimes it's just, a lucky shot clips your foot or clips around the Riot Shield, and you just got to kind of move on from it. So our next topic is going to be gadgets and specializations. There's quite a bit of options when it comes to the medium class for good gadgets and good specializations. So let's start by talking about specializations. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the dematerializer. The dematerializer allows you to really kind of carve your own path when you're playing. And I love that it allows you to kind of cut enemies off when you can use it properly. Here I use it to secure a quick kill. So there's a lot of skill expression that is on offer when using the dematerializer, but it's also a really great tool to be used defensively. When you're defending a cash out, you can place something like a jump pad on the floor below the cash box, and then you can dematerialize the floor, and in combination you can kind of add some additional stall time to the objective by bouncing the cash box off of your jump pad on the floor below. In general, anything that's going to allow you to catch up to your enemies when they're trying to get away from you is going to be really great for Riot Shield users. And I do think that personally that the dematerializer is the strongest specialization when paired with the Riot Shield. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about the other two specs as well, because they do have a lot to offer. So the Healing Beam, which got a buff in Season 8, is a really great tool to have at your disposal. If you're playing with a coordinated team, if you're using some communication with your teammates, having the Healing Beam is going to really help, especially if you're grouped up together, because you can not only apply pressure to the enemy team by charging in with your Riot Shield, but then you can also you can kind of negate some of the damage that they've done by using the Healing Beam. And then finally we have the Sentry Turret, the Guardian Turret, and I find this is less helpful in the majority of situations. It's less versatile, I think is the word that I would use there, but it still can work and still be a great tool for Riot Shield users, especially if you're playing defense and you can set up your own turret in one part of the room and then utilize your Riot Shield to apply pressure while also dealing damage to the enemy team with your turret. So you have some options there when it comes to the specializations. I don't think that any of them are necessarily bad. It just kind of takes some figuring out what you want out of your specialization and what's going to serve you the best. When we look at our gadgets, I think that the defibrillator, the jump pad, and the zipline are all incredibly strong gadgets for the medium class. Typically, I have 2 of the 3 with me pretty much at all times. I'm almost always using the defibrillator just because it offers something that no other class has the ability to have, which is to bring back another ally in a moment's notice. Having 2 guns in a fight is way better than 1, and especially when you yourself don't have a gun to begin with, it's really nice to bring back a teammate in the amount of time that the defibrillator allows you to. Jump pad and the zipline are both kind of on a similar level for me. I think that I gravitate more towards the jump pad personally, but one of the strengths of the zipline when paired with the Riot Shield, especially if the zipline is flat and there's no angle to it, is that you can hold up your Riot Shield and you can block any incoming damage while using the zipline. And when players are on the zipline, they actually move at the same speed as each other. So while normally a light character might run faster than a medium character, if a light character and a medium character are both on a zipline, they're both traveling at the same speed. And so it allows you sometimes to kind of gain some distance on your enemies that maybe aren't suspecting you, to catch up with them. The jump pad, of course, really great gadget to have at your disposal. It's going to allow you to gain access to some verticality. It's really quick to throw it down. I've mentioned how you can utilize it defensively to kind of stall a cash out. So there's just so many uses for the jump pad that I think that it's such a great gadget to have in your back pocket, especially when playing a melee weapon. And then I would talk about some of the grenades next. I think that there's quite a few really great grenades to pair with the Riot Shield. Personally, I love the pyro grenades. It allows me to gain the ability to deal some damage from further away. So if an enemy is trying to get away from me, I can throw a pyro grenade in their direction. But it also allows you to play a little bit more defensively with the cash out, with the objective. If somebody's stealing a cash out, you can throw a pyro grenade at it. If there's only a limited amount of time left and you want to just kind of add some stall time to the objective, you can use a pyro grenade for that. You can block off, different pathways and various things like that. So I think pyro grenades are a really strong gadget to bring with you. But I'd also want to mention the smoke grenades and the flashbangs, because these are both really strong tools that not everybody utilizes to their fullest potential. Flashbangs, you get 2 charges and they come back incredibly fast. So if you're using them well, you can really kind of apply some pressure and take away your opponent's ability to see what's happening around them. One of the dangers is, of course, that you can flash your own teammates, so you do want to be careful when using that. And then the smoke grenades, you get 3 charges of smoke grenades. They don't come back as fast, but they do disable any sort of auto aim that controller players are using. It hides the overall outline of your character and the health bar above your head, and that can allow you to just kind of gain the advantage when going up against various opponents. Goo grenades, of course, are a really strong tool as well. I don't use them as much personally because I like to have access to a gadget that can deal a little bit of damage if I need it. And goo grenades are going to be great for trying to cut off enemies. You can use them to, reach various new locations. There's a lot of skill expression and versatility to goo grenades in general. So you really can't go wrong with this gadget. It's just something that me personally, I don't use as often when playing Riot Shield. Now, of course, we have like the data reshaper, there's the breach drill, the glitch trap. All of these various tools, I think, are kind of in a tier below some of these grenades that I mentioned. They're a little bit more niche. And so while they don't have as much versatility and you're not going to be using them as often, they can come in handy in certain situations. Glitch traps, of course, you can stop the light players from using their evasive dash when they're affected by it. The breach drill, if you're taking something like the turret or the healing beam, but you still want to gain access to a breaching tool, you can take the breach drill with you. And then, of course, the data reshaper is really great at negating any sort of enemy turrets or enemy barricades and various things like that. But one of the most important tools that you have at your disposal as a Riot Shield player is your brain. You got to be able to use that thing properly. You got to be able to think a little bit ahead of your opponents, look to try to cut them off, look to try to use different techniques and strategies that maybe they aren't necessarily expecting of you in order to gain the upper hand. Here's a decent example of what I mean by that. I noticed that my team have both been eliminated, and instead of continuing towards the cash out, knowing that I have somebody behind me, I decide to throw the cash box off the stage, which is going to distract my enemy for a moment. The cash box is going to return to where it was thrown last, and then I'm able to get the drop on the unsuspecting heavy. Instead of him following me, I'm now following behind him, and I'm able to take advantage of the situation a little bit better. That's going to lead into our next talking point, which is going to be third partying. So essentially what you want to do as a Riot Shield player is take advantage of the chaos that's going on when your enemies are fighting each other. They're not necessarily going to be able to quickly turn their attention towards you, so it'll allow you to easily gain ground. Sometimes it'll lead to some easy eliminations. And at the very least, hopefully the enemy has taken some kind of damage, which will overall lower your time to kill with the Riot Shield. You do, of course, want to be careful when trying to engage two teams at once that are fighting each other, especially if their full team is there. So if it's, 3-on-3 and you're showing up by yourself and your teammates are a little bit behind you or they're doing a flank, you could easily put yourself in a very vulnerable position. But a lot of times, especially if you kind of can gauge how many people are there, how many people are focused on each other, you can come in and kind of clean things up really easily. I want to take a moment to touch on actually using the shield. So you'll notice here, what I'm trying to do oftentimes is angle the shield towards my enemy. So a lot of times I won't necessarily be facing them head on, but I'll be kind of approaching them diagonally so that from their point of view, my shield is between me and them. When you're holding up your shield and actually trying to block with it, your feet will be exposed. So that's one of the things that you'll want to be mindful of, is that you are still, you are still vulnerable when you're holding up your shield, but they have to be a little bit more knowledgeable of the game to take advantage of that situation. And of course, they have to start aiming towards your feet. That's going to leave them a little bit vulnerable to maybe your teammates if they can take advantage of that situation. But for the most part, what I try to do is just try to angle my character's body so that the shield is between myself and the opponent, and that's going to help you kind of mitigate some of that damage when you're approaching your enemies. Next, we got to talk about applying pressure. This is pretty much the #1 goal of using the Riot Shield. Again, especially if you're in a team where you have good communication, you're working together, you're grouping up, you're trying to push the objective at the same time. Your role sometimes is not necessarily to secure eliminations, but to serve as a distraction that'll open up opportunities for your teammates to really kind of take advantage of the situation that you've put them in. So here I kind of threw, a pyro grenade towards the door, so I'm blocking off that entry point, and then I'm just going in and trying to press my opponents so that they either have to focus their fire towards me or they have to start fleeing from the situation. A lot of times, applying pressure doesn't necessarily just mean when you have teammates with you, but it's also applying pressure when your opponents are trying to escape the situation. Sometimes, if it's beneficial for you, taking a second to chase down that opponent in order to secure the kill is the best course of action for you, and sometimes it's going to be to let them, fall back and retreat, and you go back and refocus on the objective. So you got to kind of feel things out. You don't want to overcommit to chasing down an enemy, especially when you know that eventually their health is going to start regenerating. You want to be mindful of what sort of gadgets and specializations your opponent is using. For example, if you're going up against a light who has evasive dash or who has a grappling hook, they're obviously going to be able to gain more distance on you than you can possibly gain on them. So use all of these sorts of things to your advantage and identify the situations when it makes sense to chase and when it makes sense to fall back. Maybe regroup with your team or just focus on defending the objective. Overall, I think that the Riot Shield excels when you're playing defense. So when you have the cash out and you can really kind of control the situation by maybe blocking off different pathways, opening up new pathways for yourself and your team, opening up new sight lines, and just kind of playing defense and playing stall on the objective, that's where the Riot Shield really thrives. And you do want to kind of work towards, enclosed spaces. You don't necessarily want to be out in the open as much as you can, because you're going to be more vulnerable to attacks from, 360 degrees around you, rather than when you're in a room or you're in a hallway. You can only get attacked by, so many different angles in those situations. But overall, applying and creating pressure one of the greatest strengths that you have as a Riot Shield user. And again, if you can communicate with your teammates, even just using the comms wheel, letting them know where your enemies are, where you're trying to attack, when you're trying to attack, all of that can really help you kind of snowball the amount of oppression that you're imposing on your opponents. Of course, we've got to take some time to talk about counters. When it comes to playing the Riot Shield, there are so many things that are going to counter you. It's really just one of the things that you've got to kind of get used to and be smart about navigating. The flamethrower I find to be one of the biggest counters, but really any close range heavy weapon, so sledgehammer, the spear, even using charge and slam, they're all going to be very difficult for you to take on one-on-one with the Riot Shield, because you have to get in close to deal damage. They have more health than you, and they have a weapon that can dish out some pretty serious damage when you're close to them. So those are all pretty tricky. The sword is sometimes a nuisance, not always. The thing about the sword is that sword players have to hit you 3 times and you have to hit them twice. So as long as you can land your hits against the light, they do have a little bit more mobility than you, but you should be able to take them out in a lot of situations. Now, anything that's going to allow your enemy to create distance between the two of you or slow you down is obviously going to be detrimental to Riot Shield users. So things like the goo gun or goo grenades can easily create distance between you and your opponent. And then of course, if you're playing against a light who has evasive dash or has a grappling hook, they're going to be able to, increase that gap pretty easily between the two of you, which can make it a little bit tricky to really kind of get into melee range against them. So you have to be a little bit smarter in those situations. And then just really any of the grenade launchers that deal AoE damage, they don't really have to be as precise with their shots. They can really just kind of shoot at the floor and hit you through your shield. Any high rate of fire weapons, so the minigun, the M11, the P90, the ARN, sometimes they can kind of clip you, your elbows or your feet, whatever it might be that's kind of sticking outside of the shield's range. Shotguns with their, bullet spread. Turret can sometimes be a problem. Pyro mines deal a lot of burst damage. And then the pyro grenade. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on really quickly here, the shield is a physical object. So you'll see there, I wasn't able to bash through that window until I hit it with my shield. The shield has actual object collision. And so if your shield gets hit with the pyro grenade, then theoretically the pyro grenade will actually stick to it, meaning that it can pretty easily kill you. Pretty sure it's like a one and done. So you've got to be careful, try to avoid that. It doesn't happen as often. It would really kind of take, stars aligning on the opponent's end. They would have to bring the pyro grenade into the fight. They would have to land it perfectly on your shield. But if it does hit, then that could take you out pretty quickly. So, like I said, there's just a lot of things in the finals that could kind of counter the Riot Shield. That's why it's much more of a niche pick to begin with. But as I said at the very beginning, this, to me, it's my favorite weapon. I have so much fun using this weapon. It's not as easy to use, it's not as easy to pick up and be successful with as some of the assault rifles or some of the shotguns even. But overall, I find it to be incredibly rewarding, and that's what I love about using the Riot Shield. So hopefully along the way you picked up a couple of tips, some tricks. Maybe I've encouraged you to give the Riot Shield a shot of your own, see how you do with it. But at the very least, thank you so much for being here. I hope that you're having a blast playing the finals, because that's what this is all about. And just want to, thank you again for your time. I have been and always will be Coobs. Peace and love, gamers.